The fluorescent lights flickered in the Interstellar Academy of Neurosciences as Professor Zexon collapsed in front of his classroom of alien students, his 6 eyes rolling back into his elongated skull. It wasn't the medical emergency that shocked the class, it was the fact that their esteemed professor had shown an emotional response to the human specimen who had just entered their laboratory. What happened to him? Asked Krill, a third-year student with translucent skin and visible neural pathways that pulsed with blue light. She approached the professor cautiously, her sensory tendrils recoiling slightly. The human, Ethan Wilson, stood awkwardly in the doorway. He was a medium-built man in his early 30s with dark hair and a confused expression. "I just walked in," he said. "Is he okay?" Lorne, a top student with metallic scales and 4 arms, scanned the professor with a handheld device. His neural pathways are experiencing an unprecedented surge. "This is interesting. I believe he is experiencing what humans call fear." "Fear," the class murmured collectively, many of them instinctively backing away from both their fallen professor and the human visitor. Ethan stepped forward carefully. "He seemed fine when I met him yesterday. We just arranged for me to come in today as part of your research program." "Fear is a neural malfunction," stated Vix, another student with a crystalline exoskeleton. "We learned that in basic comparative neurology. It's an evolutionary error in less developed species." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "An error? That's not how we see it on Earth." Professor Zexon stirred, his green skin pallor slowly returning to its normal blue hue. "Class," he wheezed, attempting to rise to his 4 feet, "this is our opportunity, our unexpected opportunity." The senior research assistant, Trell, helped the professor to a nearby chair. Trell was taller than the others, with multiple compound eyes that constantly moved independently of one another. "Professor," Trell said, "perhaps we should postpone today's demonstration." "No." Zexon's voice strengthened as his vital signs stabilized. "This is precisely what we need to study. I experienced it, the fear response. It was overwhelming." Ethan looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Look, I don't want to cause any trouble. I just signed up to help with some comparative brain scan research." "And you shall," Professor Zexon said, regaining his composure. "But first, class, I believe we need to reassess our understanding of fear. It appears I had a reaction to our human visitor that triggered my own species' dormant fear response, something I did not believe possible." The classroom, a circular amphitheater with floating platforms instead of traditional desks, buzzed with excitement. Most of these alien students had never been this close to a human before, and certainly not one who had inadvertently caused such a dramatic reaction. "Mr. Wilson," the professor continued, "would you be willing to expand our research parameters today? I believe we have stumbled upon something significant." Ethan scratched his head. "Depends on what you mean by expand. I'm not here to be dissected or anything." Several students laughed, a sound like tinkling glass. "Nothing so primitive," Professor Zexon assured him. "We merely wish to understand how fear functions in human biology. You see, in most advanced species across the galaxy, fear has been bred out or suppressed through evolutionary processes. It's considered a neural flaw, an inefficient response that wastes energy and clouds judgment." "Well, that's not entirely wrong," Ethan admitted, "but fear has kept humans alive for thousands of years. It's a survival mechanism." "This is what we must explore." The professor's enthusiasm had fully returned now. "Class, prepare the neural imaging chamber. Today's lesson has changed. We will investigate how fear functions as a survival adaptation rather than a neural error." The students moved with practiced efficiency, activating a transparent chamber in the center of the room. Holographic displays flickered to life around it. Ethan hesitated. What exactly will this involve? "Nothing invasive," Trell assured him. "We'll simply monitor your brain activity while exposing you to various stimuli, perhaps some images or sounds that might trigger minor fear responses." Like jump scares in movies? Ethan asked. The aliens looked at each other in confusion. Cultural reference, Ethan explained. Never mind. As the preparations continued, Krill approached Ethan with obvious curiosity. Is it true that humans deliberately seek out fear responses for entertainment? Horror movies, haunted houses, roller coasters, yeah, some of us enjoy being scared in controlled situations, Ethan replied. Krill's sensory tendrils rippled in what appeared to be disbelief. Fascinating. We consider fear to be a design flaw in neural architecture. The idea of intentionally triggering it is difficult to comprehend. Everything ready, Professor Zexon called out. The chamber was prepared and Ethan reluctantly stepped inside. The transparent walls closed around him, though he noted there was plenty of room and air. We'll begin with simple visual stimuli, the professor explained. Mr. Wilson, please relax and react naturally. The first image appeared a large spider crawling directly toward the viewer. Ethan flinched slightly. Not a big fan of those. The neural imaging displays lit up with activity, causing excited murmurs among the students. Look at the amygdala response, Vix noted, pointing to the holographic brain scan. And the immediate release of adrenaline and cortisol. Now a different stimulus, Professor Zexon directed. The next image showed a person standing at the edge of an extremely high cliff. Ethan's heart rate increased noticeably on the monitors. Heights. Yeah, that gets me a bit. Remarkable, Professor Zexon commented. The fear response is instantaneous, yet Mr. Wilson remains functional. He recognizes the fear, but can analyze it simultaneously. The images continued dark waters with shapes moving beneath. A car skidding on ice toward a tree, a growling predator about to pounce. With each image, the students documented different aspects of Ethan's neural and physiological responses. They were particularly fascinated by how quickly his body prepared for potential action, the fight or flight response that many of their species had evolved beyond. I think we have sufficient baseline data, Professor Zexon finally announced. Mr. Wilson, thank you for your patience. You may exit the chamber. As Ethan stepped out, he noticed the students looking at him with new interest. So fear actually helps humans? Lorne asked, genuine curiosity in his multifaceted eyes. Of course, Ethan replied. Fear keeps us from doing dangerous things. It makes us cautious around threats. It's like an internal alarm system. But it's so primitive, Vix interjected. Surely advanced reasoning would serve the same purpose without the physiological stress. Ethan shrugged. Maybe. But when you've got seconds to react, fear is faster than rational thought. It's saved countless human lives throughout our history. Professor Zexon floated closer, his earlier distress completely gone. This opens fascinating avenues of research. The notion that what we considered a neural defect could actually be a specialized adaptation. A sudden alarm blared through the academy, causing Ethan to jump. The alien students, however, merely looked up with mild interest. What's that? Ethan asked, tensing. Just a standard security drill, Trell explained calmly. We have them regularly. But Professor Zexon's communication device lit up with an urgent message. His 6 eyes widened as he read it. It's not a drill, he said, his voice suddenly tight. There's been a containment breach in the xenobiology lab. Level 4 pathogens. The students remained surprisingly calm, simply beginning to pack up their materials methodically. Shouldn't we be evacuating? Ethan asked, already backing toward the door. The protocols are clear, Professor Zexon said. We must secure our research and proceed to designated safety zones in an orderly fashion. But level 4 pathogens, that sounds serious, Ethan insisted. It is extremely serious, the professor acknowledged, but panic would be inefficient. Ethan looked at the aliens in disbelief as they calmly collected data crystals and shut down equipment. With all due respect, Professor, sometimes a little fear-driven urgency is exactly what's needed. Before anyone could respond, the Academy's AI voice echoed through the room. Warning, Containment breach spreading to level 3. All personnel must evacuate immediately, quarantine protocols initiating in 5 minutes. That announcement finally prompted faster movement from the alien students, though still nothing Ethan would describe as urgency or fear. "Professor," Ethan said firmly, "how dangerous is this pathogen to humans?" "Unknown," Zexon admitted. "It primarily affects silicon-based life forms, but cross-species transmission has not been thoroughly studied." "Great," Ethan muttered. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but you all need to move faster. This isn't the time for calm efficiency." To demonstrate his point, Ethan moved quickly to the door, checking the corridor outside. "Which way to the nearest exit?" "Left, then second right, then down the gravity tube," Trell supplied. "But we must ensure all research data is properly—" "Forget the data," Ethan interrupted. "If this is as dangerous as it sounds, we need to get out now." The aliens looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite read: confusion, perhaps, or fascination at his emotional response. Professor Zexon finally seemed to recognize the urgency. "Perhaps, Mr. Wilson is demonstrating the practical application of fear as a survival mechanism. Class, leave your materials. We will proceed to the evacuation point immediately." As they moved into the corridor, they could see other alien faculty and students moving with the same methodical calm, despite the blaring alarms and flashing lights. "This is insane," Ethan muttered. They turned left as instructed, but before they could reach the second right, a section of the corridor ahead sealed shut automatically. "Quarantine protocol has begun early," Professor Zexon observed. "We must find an alternate route." "The service tunnels," Krill suggested. "There's an access point in the adjacent laboratory." They diverted into a research lab similar to the one they'd left. True to Krill's word, there was a panel in the floor that opened to reveal a maintenance tunnel. "These run throughout the academy," Trell explained to Ethan. "They should allow us to bypass the sealed sections." One by one, they descended into the tunnel, a tight space with glowing blue lines along the walls providing minimal lighting. Ethan noticed that several of the larger aliens had to compress or reconfigure their bodies to fit. They moved in single file through the tunnel, with Krill leading the way. The alarms were muffled down here but still audible. After several minutes of crawling, they came to a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Krill hesitated. "I'm not certain which way leads to the evacuation zone." "You don't know?" Ethan asked, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. "I've never actually used these tunnels," Krill admitted. "I only know of their existence from the Academy schematics." Professor Zexon consulted his communication device. "The network appears to be failing. I cannot access the building plans." Ethan felt his own fear response kicking in the tight space, the unknown danger, the possibility of being trapped. But he forced himself to think clearly. "Does anyone have any sense of direction down here? Which way is toward the exterior of the building?" Lorne pointed to the right tunnel. "Based on our path so far, that direction should lead outward." "Then that's our best bet," Ethan decided. They continued through the right tunnel, which sloped slightly downward. After another few minutes of crawling, they reached a vertical shaft with rungs embedded in the wall. "This should lead to a maintenance room on the ground level," Vic suggested, examining the shaft. "Up we go then," Ethan said, reaching for the first rung. The climb was longer than expected, at least 30 feet straight up. When Ethan reached the top, he found a sealed hatch. "There's a locking mechanism," he called down to the others. "Any idea how to open it?" "Allow me," Trell said, climbing up beside Ethan with surprising agility for his size. His multiple eyes examined the lock. "It's a standard maintenance access. It should open." With a sudden tremor shook the entire shaft, nearly dislodging Ethan from the rungs. Dust and small debris showered down on the aliens below. "What was that?" Ethan gasped, clinging tightly to his position. "Possibly the containment protocols escalating," Professor Zexon called up. "Certain areas may be undergoing decontamination procedures." "All the more reason to get out quickly," Ethan insisted. The lock. Trell manipulated something on the hatch that Ethan couldn't quite see, and with a hiss, it swung open. Ethan climbed out first, finding himself in what appeared to be a janitor's closet filled with cleaning equipment designed for alien physiologies he could barely comprehend. He helped the others out one by one. "We should be near the main atrium," Professor Zexon said, once everyone had emerged. "From there, we can reach the emergency exits." They cautiously opened the door to the closet and found themselves in a wide corridor. The alarms were louder here, and the emergency lighting cast an eerie blue glow over everything. "The atrium should be straight ahead," Trell confirmed. They moved quickly down the corridor, Ethan leading the way despite this being his first visit to the academy. His fear was channeling into action now, the very thing he'd been trying to explain to these aliens earlier. The corridor opened into the massive atrium, a soaring space with a transparent dome ceiling showing the purple-hued sky of this alien world. Other evacuees were visible crossing the space, heading toward the main exits. "We made it," Krill said, her sensory tendrils relaxing slightly. But as they started across the atrium, a containment barrier began to descend from the ceiling, a transparent force field designed to section off parts of the building. "Run," Ethan shouted, breaking into a sprint. The aliens seemed startled by his outburst, but followed his lead, moving faster than their natural inclination. The barrier continued its inexorable descent. Ethan made it past the barrier's path first, then turned to see Professor Zexon and several students still on the other side, the barrier now just feet from the floor. "Hurry," he called. Krill and Vix dove under the barrier just before it reached the ground. Lorne, with his longer body, had to slide beneath it at the last possible second. But Professor Zexon and Trell were too far behind the barrier, sealed completely before they could reach it. "Professor," the students called out in distress, the first real emotion Ethan had seen from them. Zexon approached the barrier from the other side. "Continue to the evacuation point," he instructed. "Trell and I will find another route." "But the pathogen," Krill began. "We have no indication it has reached this section," Zexon assured them. "Go, we will rejoin you outside." Ethan hesitated, reluctant to leave anyone behind. "Mr. Wilson," the professor said, his voice clear despite the barrier between them, "your human fear response was correct in this situation. It prompted immediate action. Please use that instinct to lead my students to safety." Ethan nodded reluctantly. "We'll send help once we're outside." He turned to the alien students. "Let's go. The main exit is just ahead." They continued across the atrium, joining the flow of other evacuees heading toward the large doors at the far end. Emergency personnel in containment suits, aliens of various species Ethan hadn't seen before, were directing the evacuation. "The situation appears to be worsening," Lorne observed, noticing the increasing number of containment-suited figures. As they neared the exit, a tremor stronger than the first shook the building. Part of the transparent dome above cracked, causing screams of alarm from some of the younger aliens. For the first time, Ethan saw what looked like genuine fear rippling through the crowd. They pushed through the exit doors into the open air of the academy grounds. Emergency vehicles hovered nearby, and medical personnel were setting up decontamination stations. "We need to report that Professor Zexon and Trell are still inside," Ethan told the students, heading toward what appeared to be a command center. Before they could reach it, another violent shake rocked the ground, and a section of the academy's east wing collapsed with a thunderous crash. Dust and debris billowed into the air. "That's where the xenobiology labs are located," Vix said, her crystalline form trembling slightly. "The primary containment must have failed completely." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine, and the professor, where would he and Trell be now? Krill's sensory tendrils were fully extended, quivering. If they continued from where we left them, they would be heading toward the east emergency exit. They all turned to look at the collapsed wing in horror. "We need to tell the emergency crews," Ethan insisted, breaking into a run toward the command center. He explained the situation to an alien official with multiple limbs wearing what looked like a commander's insignia. The official immediately dispatched a rescue team equipped with containment suits toward the East Wing. Ethan and the students watched anxiously as the rescue team disappeared into the dust cloud. Minutes stretched interminably. More evacuees continued to stream from the building, some being directed to decontamination, others to medical triage. "Look!" Lorne suddenly pointed with one of his forearms. Emerging from the dust were two containment-suited figures supporting Professor Zexon between them. The professor looked injured, one of his legs dragging uselessly, but he was alive. Behind them came Trell, also in a containment suit, helping another injured alien. "They made it," Ethan breathed in relief. The medical team rushed to take charge of the injured, whisking them away to a field hospital that had been rapidly established on the academy grounds. Hours later, after decontamination procedures and medical checks, Ethan was cleared to join the students in a waiting area outside the field hospital. They sat in uncomfortable silence, each processing the day's events in their own way. "Professor Zexon is stabilized," a medical officer eventually informed them. "His injuries are not life-threatening. You may see him briefly." They were led to a quarantine tent where the professor lay on a medical platform, various monitoring devices attached to his blue-skinned body. His 6 eyes brightened when he saw them. "My students," he said weakly, "and Mr. Wilson, I am pleased you all reached safety." "How did you escape the collapse, Professor?" Krill asked. "We were nearly caught in it," Zexon admitted. "But Trell experienced something extraordinary. He felt fear genuine, overwhelming fear, and it saved us both. He sensed the collapse seconds before it happened and pulled me into a reinforced doorway, without that split-second reaction." The professor's voice trailed off, the implication clear. "It appears," he continued after a moment, "that our entire understanding of fear requires revision. What we dismissed as a neural error may in fact be a sophisticated survival mechanism that our own evolution has bypassed, perhaps to our detriment." Ethan stepped closer to the professor's bedside. "Fear isn't pleasant, but it serves a purpose. It's not about the feeling itself, it's about what the feeling makes you do." "Indeed," Zexon agreed. "And this opens fascinating new areas of research, if we could somehow reintegrate controlled fear responses into our species." "Always the scientist," Trell said, entering the tent. He had been cleared from quarantine before the others. "Even after nearly dying, you're thinking about research." "Speaking of research," Ethan said, "what happened with the containment breach? Was anyone exposed to the pathogen?" "Initial reports suggest the containment protocols were largely successful," Trell informed them. "The collapse actually helped seal the primary leak. A few researchers were exposed but are responding well to treatment." "And what was this pathogen anyway?" Ethan asked. "A silicon-based microorganism from the gas giant Nexus Roman 4, Professor Zexon explained. "It reconfigures silicon molecules highly dangerous to many species in the Federation, though likely harmless to carbon-based life like yourself." "Small comfort," Ethan muttered. The medical officer returned, indicating their visit needed to conclude. "The professor requires rest." As they prepared to leave, Zexon called out, "Mr. Wilson, would you consider extending your stay at the academy? I believe we have much more to learn from you and perhaps you from us." Ethan considered the request. The day had been terrifying, yet somehow exhilarating too. These aliens had a completely different perspective on something he took for granted, the role of fear in survival. And they had actually begun to experience it themselves during the crisis. "I'll think about it," he promised. "But maybe next time we keep the research a bit more controlled." "Agreed," Zexon said with what Ethan now recognized as the alien equivalent of a smile. "Though I must note that today's unplanned experiment provided data we might never have obtained in controlled conditions." Outside the quarantine tent, Ethan found himself surrounded by the alien students, all regarding him with newfound respect. "You knew exactly what to do," Krill said. "Without hesitation." "That's what fear does when it's working properly," Ethan explained. "It bypasses the thinking part of your brain and triggers immediate action. But you were still able to think clearly," Vix noted. "You didn't just react blindly." "That takes practice," Ethan admitted. "Humans spend years learning to balance fear with rational thought. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes not, but the fear itself, that's hardwired." In the days that followed, as the Academy began repairs and normal operations gradually resumed, Ethan found himself the center of an impromptu study group. Professor Zexon, still recovering but insatiably curious, coordinated from his medical bed as the students designed new experiments to understand the human fear response. They developed simulations, both virtual and physical, to map exactly how fear translated to survival advantages. They studied historical human data, analyzing how fear had shaped societies, cultures, and even technological development. Most fascinating to Ethan was watching the aliens themselves begin to acknowledge the stirrings of fear in their own neurological makeup, dormant pathways awakened by the crisis they'd experienced together. "It appears fear was never fully eliminated from our evolution," Professor Zexon theorized during one of their sessions. "Rather, it was suppressed and redirected. What we're seeing now is its re-emergence under specific conditions." "Like a backup system," Ethan suggested. "It's still there if you really need it." 1 month after the containment breach, the Academy held a formal recognition ceremony for those who had distinguished themselves during the crisis. To Ethan's surprise, he was among those called forward. The Academy Chancellor, a towering being of pure energy contained within an environmental suit, presented him with a medallion. "Ethan Wilson," the Chancellor intoned, "for demonstrating the practical application of xenoneurological principles in crisis conditions, and for expanding our understanding of comparative brain function, we present you with the Academy's Medal of Scientific Advancement." As Ethan accepted the medallion, he caught the eyes of Professor Zexon and his students in the audience. They were watching him with a mixture of academic interest and something that looked remarkably like emotional connection. Later at the reception, Professor Zexon approached him, now fully recovered from his injuries. "We have prepared a research proposal," he said without preamble. "A 5-year study of fear as an adaptive mechanism across species. We would be honored if you would consider joining us as a consultant and subject matter expert." Ethan raised his eyebrows. 5 years. That's a big commitment." "We believe the potential benefits are considerable," Zexon continued. "Not merely academic knowledge, but practical applications. Early warning systems based on fear response neural patterns. Emergency protocols that incorporate the speed of fear-driven decision-making with the precision of logical analysis." "And you think studying human fear can help with all that?" "Not just human fear," Zexon corrected. "The reawakening of our own capacity for this response. What we once dismissed as a neural error may prove to be the missing component in our approach to unexpected threats." Ethan considered the offer. His initial agreement had been for a week-long research study, which had turned into a month of the most fascinating work he'd ever done. The idea of continuing this exploration was tempting. "I'd need to go back to Earth first," he said finally. "Settle some things, pack properly. But yes, I think I'd like to be part of this research." Professor Zexon's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, his species equivalent of pleased surprise. "Excellent, we shall make the necessary arrangements." As the reception continued around them, Ethan found himself watching the aliens with new appreciation. They moved differently now, more alert, more present. The containment breach had changed them, awakening something primal that generations of evolution had suppressed. Krill approached, her sensory tendrils gently waving. "I experienced it again yesterday," she said without introduction. Fear, I was in the simulation chamber running tests and the power fluctuated, just for a second, but I felt afraid, Ethan supplied. Yes. My body responded before my mind could process what was happening. It was efficient. She seemed almost surprised by her own assessment. That's the point, Ethan said. Fear isn't pleasant, but it's incredibly efficient at keeping you alive. We have much to learn, Krill acknowledged. And perhaps much to remember. As the evening wound down, Ethan found himself standing by a large window overlooking the academy grounds. The repairs to the east wing were well underway, the collapsed section already rebuilt with enhanced safety features. Professor Zexon joined him at the window. Your human expression, "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger," seems particularly apt. Sometimes, Ethan agreed cautiously. Though we've learned there are many kinds of harm that don't follow that rule, indeed, nuance is important in all scientific inquiry. The professor was silent for a moment before adding, "When you return from Earth, we will begin with a comprehensive mapping of fear responses across various potential threats. I'm particularly interested in how humans differentiate between immediate physical dangers and more abstract threats. Like climate change versus a charging predator, precisely. Your species seems capable of fearing things that aren't immediately present future threats, invisible dangers, even societal collapse. This anticipatory fear is fascinating," Ethan smiled. "We're complicated that way. Fear of the unknown might be our most powerful fear of all. Yet here you are," Zexon observed, "on an alien world surrounded by species completely unlike your own, having just agreed to a 5-year research commitment. You do not seem afraid of the unknown." "Oh, I am," Ethan admitted. "But humans have another quality that works alongside fear, which is curiosity. Sometimes it's even stronger than our fear." Professor Zexon made the soft clicking sound that Ethan had learned was his species' version of thoughtful contemplation. Fear as a survival mechanism. Curiosity as an advancement mechanism. The tension between safety and discovery. Perhaps this explains much about human history. "It explains a lot about me being here," Ethan agreed. In the purple twilight of this alien world, with the stars beginning to emerge in unfamiliar constellations, Ethan felt a profound sense of connection to these beings who had once dismissed fear as a neural error. They were learning what humans had known instinctively for millennia, that fear, for all its discomfort, was a gift from evolution. A gift that had allowed humanity to survive predators, natural disasters, disease, and countless other threats throughout their development. And now, ironically, it was humanity's turn to help these advanced aliens rediscover what they had evolved beyond the life-saving power of being afraid at exactly the right moment. "To fear," Ethan said, raising his glass in an impromptu toast. Professor Zexon raised his own glass in return. "To fear not as an error, but as wisdom embedded in our very cells, and to the courage that allows us to face it." Around them, the alien students raised their glasses as well, each experiencing in their own way the complex emotion they had once studied only as an abstract neural phenomenon. In that moment, despite their profound differences, they shared something universal: the recognition that sometimes being afraid is the most rational response of all.